All right, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about my reflection for the board meeting on October 15th. There were several things that were covered, um, and one of the biggest things that was news to me was Dr. Polio is retiring as of July 1st, 2025, which that I did not know. Him as a leader in reference to Harsford Chapter 5, very transformative, very much an empowering leader, and very open. My time in Jefferson County, when he was superintendent for most of my time, I found him very impactful and very intentional with what he did and what he's continued to do in the district. So it'll be very sad to see him go. That being said, I just want to touch on the certain things that were brought up by Dr. Polio, by Chuck Truesdale, the Jefferson County lobbyist for Kentucky Education, and the other board members that were present this evening. So I'll start with one of the biggest things, which was funding, and that related to several different areas, specifically Amendment 2. Chuck Truesdale presented this evening, letting everyone know about the legislative priorities for the January and February sessions. And those areas of topic were accountability, treatment of local districts, equity, student health and safety, staff recruitment and retention, and funding. Funding, obviously, we know money has the biggest impact on anything and how successful a district can be. So to begin with Amendment 2, it was very clear in Dr. Polio this evening that he is opposed to Amendment 2 passing. He would vote no, similar to our Governor Andy Beshear, who would vote no, despite Ernie Fletcher, our commissioner, who was part of this voucher system being developed through the Amendment 2 to help privatize education, which the vouchers would use public tax dollars to pay for private school students to go to private schools. 70 to 80% of the students that would take that are already in private schools, and there's usually not much success when a student from a public school goes to a private school. There's also often declines in achievement, and quote, not great by Dr. Polio. So there was also discussion, which I mentioned actually in class a few weeks ago, with false advertisement, and Dr. Polio touched on that as well, that there was mention in advertisement that there's an increase in education funding. That's false. That there's increase in teacher pay. That's false, which is actually going to cause less increase. Like, teachers would not be paid as much. It's going to take away funding from public schools. And currently, based off of Dr. Polio and Chuck Truesdale, the District of Jefferson County is operating at 20% less than what we should be operating at, given inflation, since CARA in 1990 was passed or began. And there's really a lot of false reporting happening, specifically from the Courier-Journal that Dr. Polio mentioned, stating that we're at a record funding for public education in Kentucky, and it's increased 122% since 1990, but really it should have increased by 142%, and it should be record funding every year. This is per Dr. Polio, because if every year we're at 4% inflation, then we should be at 142%. That being said, teachers in Kentucky their salary is not where it should be because of inflation. We're a first-year teacher right now from 30 years ago should be given $60,300 as a first-year teacher, but teachers right now are making $49,000 in Kentucky as a first-year teacher. So we're already paying teachers less than to start off in regards to inflation. There was little raise of 10 years with no for teacher salary. We also have 15 years of lack of funding for the retirement system. And there's also a balance of how to fund that and also fund schools and teachers and the resources that are needed for students. So that was one area that was discussed. There was another area which was about equity, specifically how JCPS opposes any efforts to discriminate against groups of students, whether it's because of race, religion, gender, sexual identity, language. Any of those has been opposed. So DEI programs K through 12 will continue to be present in Jefferson County. It's one of the pillars that we focus on, and it's there to close achievement gaps, which is something that Jefferson County continues to do and work towards. But universities have began to eliminate DEI offices, but JCPS will not be doing that. There's more mandates than there ever has been in education, safety and health, mental health practitioners, school resource officers, all of these things that we need that we're mandated to have, but specifically with school resource officers, we don't have the money to support that funding to pay for them. We also eliminated in terms of staff recruitment and retention, and we eliminated the KTIP program. It was no longer funded, but then they implemented a mentorship program, but there's also no money to fund that. So again, more mandates, not money to do that. So JCPS opposes legislation that would create any unfunded mandate for local school districts, but we're having trouble. That's like one of the things that we're going into in 2025 as a priority of area of focus. There was discussion on accountability. It was very clear that the board is operating to be transformative, to be held accountable, and to look at progress monitoring. They're starting in a committee. They started it in August, this discussion, and by November, they are going to continue with that work and have more focus every board meeting on the monitoring of the progress of student outcomes for each area. One of the things that Chuck Truesdale brought up is that a lot of the things that we're focusing on as a task force doesn't affect student outcomes, so we really need to change the trajectory in the areas that we focus on when it comes to looking at areas to improve student outcomes. So some of those areas was that like splitting up a district does not have an impact on student outcome. The number of board members has no measurable impact on student outcome. And none of the areas that the task force is looking at within the state is actually impacting students. So we really need to reevaluate what we're looking at now. There was $750,000 that has been approved to audit JCPS, and another $750,000 was approved if needed to audit JCPS, which I found shocking that we have that much money to audit a district, really, when we just need to provide some of that money to be operating at the rise of inflation so we can meet the needs of students, considering the $118 per pupil that we have. So it seems counterintuitive to spend money on auditing versus just providing the money so that we can provide the resources for our multilingual learners, our students with disabilities, our students who come from low SES or socioeconomic status is low, high poverty, obviously, the marginalized racial groups that we have within our school district, and really creating more access. That's where that money should be going. So I found that very problematic, in my opinion. Moving forward, it was really clear that the district is working to do the best that they can for students, and that they're putting things in place to make that happen. Like I mentioned in chapter 5, transformative open style leadership is present and evident to me. But it's hard to operate like that when you have a state who views JCPS as too progressive, too liberal, and wanting too much autonomy, but doesn't get the funding to really operate successfully. So it seems very hypocritical to have such strong opinions about a large district, but to not be given the adequate resources in order to operate such a large district. So there's definitely a level of micropolitics that are in existence. And really, I salute Dr. Polio for his style of leadership, running a school district at the size and really taking steps to be a progressive, transformative school district, along with his leadership being that same way, and being transparent with parents and families of the district, and embodying all the community members necessary when finding a new superintendent to replace him, when developing task force, when coming up with governing committees to assess our progress, monitoring of our goals and guardrails that we've adopted each year and will continue to do annually. So lots of information was covered, but I look forward to seeing what happens as we progress, and I have high hopes that Kentucky will vote no on Amendment 2. Thank you.